This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy. We go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. Nicotine Nazis. Have you ever heard researchers called that before?
Not really, though.
Yeah, I know, I haven't. It's a pretty shocking title for a research article.
It is.
And it made me want to learn more.
Definitely grabs your attention, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Speaks to the strong emotions surrounding this topic.
For sure. So the article we're diving into today is from Nature. It was published just last week.
Okay.
And the title is Nicotine Nazis, the Brickbats Hurled at Scientists Researching Tobacco's Harms. And get this, it's not just about tobacco.
Oh.
We're also going to be looking at similar intimidation tactics used against researchers studying alcohol and ultra-processed foods. So buckle up, because it gets pretty unsettling.
I can imagine.
So the article is based on a study that looked at data and reports spanning over 2 decades.
Wow.
From 2000 to 2022.
Sure.
They looked at 64 different sources that documented these intimidation tactics used by the tobacco, alcohol, and ultra-processed food industries. So what did they find? Like, what kinds of intimidation are we talking about?
Well, imagine you're a researcher, right?
Yeah.
You're diligently working to understand the health impacts of, say, sugary drinks.
Right.
Then suddenly you find yourself being publicly labeled a health fascist in a national newspaper.
Oh, wow.
That's the reality for many researchers.
That's intense.
It is. And in fact, public discrediting was the most common tactic uncovered in the study.
Really?
They found it in half of the sources they analyzed.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is.
So using those kinds of labels to discredit researchers and advocates, I mean, it seems like a direct attack on their credibility.
Yeah, it is. It's a deliberate strategy to undermine their work and influence public perception. These industries, they use inflammatory language, often through media articles, advertisements, and even social media, to paint a negative picture of researchers and their findings.
The article specifically mentions terms like militant extremists, nicotine Nazis, zealots, and prohibitionists.
Yeah, they're pretty loaded terms.
Yeah. It seems like they're trying to make these researchers sound like radical fringe groups.
Right.
Rather than respected scientists.
Exactly. And by using such emotionally charged language, they're aiming to make the public doubt the science itself.
That makes sense.
You know, it's a way to deflect attention from the actual evidence and create confusion.
The article gives some specific examples of these tactics in action. There was this campaign in Poland targeting young smokers that labeled researchers and anti-smoking advocates as militant extremists.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how many young people might have been swayed by that kind of rhetoric.
A lot, probably.
Yeah.
It's definitely concerning, and it's not just limited to tobacco either.
Right.
This term, health fascists, has been used to discredit anyone advocating for healthier choices, whether it's related to food, alcohol, or other lifestyle factors.
Okay.
It's a way to shut down conversations about public health and make people afraid to even speak up.
So this isn't just a few isolated incidents. It seems like there's a pattern of behavior here.
Yeah, the study found evidence of these tactics across various industries and in different parts of the world.
Wow.
Which suggests a coordinated effort to silence and intimidate those who are raising concerns about the potential harms of these products.
And it's not just verbal attacks either.
No, it's not.
The article mentioned some truly disturbing cases of physical violence and threats.
Unfortunately, yes. While public discrediting was the most common tactic, the study also found 6 sources that documented cases of violent threats or actual physical violence directed at researchers and advocates. 6. And these incidents were reported in countries all over the world, including Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, Nepal, Indonesia, and even the United Kingdom.
That's scary.
It is.
So it's shocking to think that someone would resort to violence simply for advocating for public health.
Right, and it highlights the very real risks that these individuals face when they challenge powerful industries.
The article gives a chilling account of a 2012 incident in Nigeria, where a leading tobacco control advocate was threatened at gunpoint.
Right.
And tragically, his guard and brother-in-law were killed.
That's right. It's a heart-wrenching example, and it really underscores the potential consequences of speaking out against these industries.
Absolutely.
You know, imagine the courage it takes to continue working in that kind of environment.
Yeah. It's hard to fathom. And there was another case in Colombia involving a physician named Esperanza Cerrone.
Mhm.
She was advocating for a tax on sugary drinks and ended up receiving threatening phone calls.
Wow.
And she was even followed by men on motorcycles who threatened her.
That's terrifying.
It is. These stories are a stark reminder of the lengths to which these industries will go to protect their interests.
Definitely.
It's clear that these are not isolated incidents, but rather a systemic effort to silence dissent and maintain the status quo.
Absolutely. So what happens to researchers when they're faced with this kind of intimidation? Do they just give up?
Well, you might expect them to, given the risks. But surprisingly, the study found that most researchers remain committed to their work.
Really?
Yeah,
That's amazing. It speaks volumes about their dedication to public health.
it does. They're driven by a belief in the importance of their research
Yeah.
and a desire to make a positive impact on the world.
Good course.
The article even mentions one of the study's co-authors, Karen Evans-Reeves, who faced ridicule, public criticism, Freedom of Information Act requests, and even legal threats as a result of her work.
It's unbelievable.
I know. Her story and the stories of countless others really highlight the personal and professional costs associated with this kind of research.
That they do. It takes incredible resilience to
Yeah.
keep going in the face of such adversity.
It does. It makes you realize that this isn't just an abstract debate. There are real people being affected by these tactics,
Right.
and the stakes are incredibly high.
They are. And it raises important questions about the kind of environment we're creating for scientists and advocates who are trying to make a difference. You know, how can we better support them? How can we protect their right to conduct research and speak freely without fear of reprisal?
Yeah, it's a complex issue, and it's clear that we need to find ways to address it. Now, before we move on, I want to ask you, what impact do you think this intimidation has on the research itself? Does it affect the quality or objectivity of the findings?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's something that we need to be mindful of. While the researchers in this study demonstrated remarkable resilience, we can't ignore the potential impact of working in such a hostile environment.
So even if they don't back down from their research, the constant pressure and intimidation could still affect them on a personal level.
Absolutely. It can lead to stress, anxiety, and even self-censorship.
Self-censorship.
Yeah, researchers might hesitate to publish certain findings or speak out on controversial topics for fear of reprisal, and that's a real problem. Because it means that important information might not be reaching the public.
That's a worrying thought. So if researchers are being silenced or pressured to alter their findings, it could have serious implications for public health policy.
Absolutely. It undermines the integrity of scientific research and prevents the public from accessing accurate and unbiased information.
Right.
It also creates a climate of fear and distrust, which can be very difficult to overcome.
So it's not just an attack on individual researchers.
Right.
It's an attack on the entire process of scientific inquiry
Right.
and the public's right to know.
Exactly. And it's something we need to be aware of and actively resist.
So what can we do about it? It feels pretty overwhelming. I mean, these are powerful industries with a lot of resources at their disposal.
That's true. But there are things we can do, both individually and collectively, to push back against these tactics and support the researchers and advocates who are doing this important work.
I'm definitely interested in learning more about that. So we've been talking about some pretty disturbing tactics used to silence and intimidate researchers.
Yeah,
It's easy to feel overwhelmed,
it is.
but you mentioned there are things we can do to make a difference.
Right. And one of the most important things is to realize that this battle isn't just being fought in labs and courtrooms.
Okay.
Public perception plays a huge role.
Oh, yeah, for sure. If these industries can convince the public that researchers are, untrustworthy or radical, it makes it much easier to dismiss their findings.
Exactly. These tactics, the labeling, the discrediting, the sowing of doubt, they're all aimed at shaping how the public views the science and the people behind it.
So if enough people start thinking, oh, those researchers are just a bunch of fanatics, it becomes easier to ignore their warnings,
Right.
even if those warnings are based on solid evidence.
Exactly. And that's why it's crucial for us to become more critical consumers of information.
Okay.
We need to be aware of the sources we're getting our information from. And we need to be able to recognize these tactics when we see them.
So it's about asking ourselves questions like, is this article from a reputable news outlet?
Yeah.
Or does this website have any obvious biases?
Yes. And also, is the language being used emotionally charged? Are they attacking the person instead of addressing the actual arguments?
Right. And
Those are all red flags.
like those ads you sometimes see that try to make fun of health guidelines,
Oh, yeah.
using slogans like, they're coming for your cheeseburgers next.
Right.
They appeal to people's fears instead of engaging with the actual science.
Exactly. It's a way to distract from the real issues and manipulate public opinion. And speaking of public opinion, another powerful thing we can do is actively support the researchers and advocates who are doing this important work.
So you mean like following them on social media,
Yeah.
sharing their articles, amplifying their voices?
Exactly. It's about creating a counter movement to the negativity and intimidation they're facing.
Gotcha.
Show them that there are people who value their work and stand with them.
And it's not just about online support either. Right.
Not at all.
We can also support organizations that are working in these areas.
Absolutely. Donating to their causes, volunteering our time, or even just spreading awareness about the challenges they face. Every little bit helps.
Right.
You know, I think a lot of people simply aren't aware of what's going on. They don't realize that researchers are facing these kinds of threats and pressure.
That's true. So part of it is just raising awareness.
Right.
And educating people about what's happening.
Exactly. Because if we want to effectively counter these tactics, people need to be aware of them. We need to empower people to recognize manipulation and make informed decisions based on evidence, not fear-mongering.
So it's about helping people understand that their health and well-being are at stake.
You got it. And it's not just about protecting ourselves as individuals. Supporting researchers and advocates is about protecting the integrity of science itself.
It's about safeguarding our right to accurate information and evidence-based decision-making.
Precisely. It's a fight worth fighting. Now, going back to the research, the study highlighted the impact of these intimidation tactics on the researchers themselves.
Right.
Even though most researchers kept going with their work, it's clear that these experiences take a toll.
Yeah. It's important to acknowledge their courage and resilience.
It is.
But we also need to think about how we can better support their mental and emotional well-being.
We do. These are people who are putting themselves on the line for the sake of public health.
I mean, think about Karen Evans-Reeves, the researcher we discussed earlier.
Right.
It takes tremendous strength to face public ridicule, criticism, and legal threats, all while trying to conduct rigorous research.
Absolutely. And we can all contribute to creating a more supportive environment for researchers.
How?
It can be as simple as offering words of encouragement or showing solidarity.
Okay.
We can also advocate for policies that protect academic freedom.
Right.
And ensure that researchers have access to resources like legal counsel if they face threats. And we can support organizations that provide resources to help researchers cope with the stress and anxiety that often come with this kind of work.
Right. It's about creating a climate where researchers feel safe and supported in their pursuit of knowledge, even when that knowledge challenges powerful interests.
Exactly.
After all, their fight is our fight, too. Now, you mentioned earlier that these industries go to such great lengths because there's so much profit at stake.
Right, exactly. These industries make a lot of money from products that can be harmful to health, so they have a strong incentive to silence or discredit anyone who might threaten their profits.
It's a classic case of money influencing public health.
It is, and it's why we see these tactics being used to delay, derail, or prevent regulations that could hurt their bottom line.
Like, think about the fight over sugar taxes or warning labels on unhealthy products.
Exactly.
These industries use every tool at their disposal to resist regulations that could impact their sales, even if those regulations are in the best interest of public health.
It's important to remember that we're not just dealing with scientific debates. We're dealing with powerful economic interests that will go to great lengths to protect their profits, even if it means putting people's health at risk.
It's a reminder that we need to be vigilant and informed so that we can make decisions based on evidence, not on spin or manipulation.
Well said. This isn't just about science. It's about power, accountability, and the health of our society.
Wow.
It's about who gets to control the narrative and how decisions are made that impact our lives.
It's about ensuring that evidence-based decision-making prevails over corporate interests.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, but that power needs to be defended. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the language used in these debates and how it's often manipulated to influence public perception.
You mean like how they frame the issues?
Exactly. Framing is all about how an issue is presented, the language that's used, and the context that's provided.
Okay.
It can have a huge impact on how people perceive and understand a topic.
So, like, instead of talking about the health risks of sugary drinks, they might try to frame it as a matter of personal choice or freedom.
Exactly. It's a classic tactic. They shift the focus away from the potential harms of their products and try to make it about individual liberty or government overreach.
They appeal to people's emotions
Right.
and make them feel like they're being attacked or controlled.
Right. It makes people less receptive to the scientific evidence because they feel like their personal freedom is being threatened.
Yeah, that's a clever way to avoid the real issue.
It is, and we need to be aware of it. When we see this kind of framing being used, we need to be able to see through it and get to the heart of the matter.
So how do we do that? How do we recognize when framing is being used to manipulate public opinion?
Pay attention to the language. Are they using emotionally charged terms? Are they trying to evoke a specific reaction?
Like the terms we discussed earlier, health fascists or nicotine Nazis.
Right.
Those are clearly meant to provoke a negative response
Right.
and shut down any reasonable discussion.
Exactly. And it's not just individual words. Look at the overall narrative they're constructing.
Okay.
Is it balanced? Does it present all sides of the issue fairly?
So it's about being media savvy.
Right.
We need to be able to analyze the information we're given and not just accept it at face value.
Yes. And we need to be willing to challenge the dominant narratives, ask questions, seek out alternative perspectives, and don't be afraid to think for yourself.
Because if we don't, we risk being manipulated and missing the bigger picture.
Exactly. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about having informed and nuanced conversations about complex issues that affect our lives.
It's about being thoughtful, critical thinkers who can engage in respectful dialogue even when we disagree.
Now, before we wrap things up, there's one more point I want to touch on. It hasn't been explicitly stated, but it's been woven throughout our entire conversation today.
Okay, I'm curious. What is it?
It's the issue of trust. At the core of these intimidation tactics is an attempt to erode public trust in science and the institutions that support it.
That makes sense. If people don't trust the science or the people conducting it, then it becomes much easier to dismiss their findings regardless of the evidence.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial that we actively work to rebuild and strengthen that trust.
But how do we do that in a world where misinformation is so rampant?
Right.
And there's so much distrust of authority, it feels like a daunting task.
It is. But I think it starts with transparency.
You mean being open about the research process, the funding sources,
Yes.
and any potential conflicts of interest?
Yes. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. When researchers are transparent about their work, it helps to build credibility and trust.
And we also need to hold those who engage in these intimidation tactics accountable.
We do.
Expose their methods, their motivations, and the damage they're doing to public discourse.
Absolutely. We need to have honest conversations about the role of power and influence in shaping scientific knowledge.
Because let's face it, science isn't always objective and neutral.
No.
There are often political and economic forces at play
Right.
that can influence research priorities, funding decisions, and even the interpretation of findings.
You're right. And recognizing those influences is essential if we're going to have honest conversations about science and its role in society.
It's about being critical thinkers, asking tough questions, and demanding accountability from those in positions of power.
And it's about recognizing that science is a human endeavor with all its complexities and imperfections. But despite those imperfections, it remains our best tool for understanding the world and making informed decisions. So how do we balance individual choice with the need for collective action? Where do we draw the line?
That's a great question, and it's something we all need to grapple with. There are no easy answers.
I agree.
It's about finding that balance between personal freedom
Yeah.
and the well-being of everyone, between taking responsibility for our own choices and acknowledging that sometimes we need bigger changes to address systemic issues.
Sometimes the most effective way to protect individual freedom is by working together. Think about seatbelt laws.
Okay.
On the surface, they might seem like an infringement on personal choice, but they actually protect everyone on the road.
It's a good example of how individual actions can have broader consequences and how collective action can sometimes be necessary to protect us all.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of thinking critically about these issues and being willing to engage in constructive dialogue, even when it's difficult. So the next time you encounter a debate about public health, whether it's about tobacco, alcohol, those ultra-processed foods we all love, or something else entirely, remember what we've discussed today.
Okay.
Don't take everything at face value.
Right.
Question the sources.
Look for those loaded terms.
Yes.
The ones designed to trigger an emotional response rather than encourage thoughtful consideration.
Demand transparency. Who's funding the research?
Right. What are their motivations?
And most importantly, don't be afraid to speak up.
Yes.
Share your thoughts, challenge misinformation, and support the researchers and advocates who are fighting for your health.
Because in the end, this isn't just about protecting a few scientists. It's about protecting your right to accurate information and making choices that benefit you and everyone around you.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together and that we all have a role to play in creating a healthier, more informed society.
Well said. And that wraps up our deep dive for today. We've covered a lot of ground, but the conversation doesn't have to end here.
That's right. Keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, and remember, knowledge is power.
And power, as we've seen today, needs to be defended.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to think about.
It is. It reminds us that we can't just be passive consumers of information, We have to be active participants in shaping the narrative around public health.
Yeah, and that's what this deep dive has really been all about. It has. We've explored the unsettling tactics used to silence researchers, the motivations behind those tactics, and the role we all play in pushing back against them.
It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the complexity of these issues, right? And the power of the industries involved.
Yeah. But it's important to remember that we're not powerless.
Right.
We have a voice, and we can use it to advocate for change.
We can. We can support researchers and advocates. We can demand transparency and hold those who engage in these tactics accountable.
We can also educate ourselves and others about these issues so that we can make informed decisions about our health and well-being.
Absolutely. And we can create a culture that values science, evidence-based decision-making, and open dialogue.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the most important thing is to remember that knowledge is power. But that power needs to be defended, right? It requires vigilance, critical thinking, and a willingness to speak out against those who seek to undermine it.
And that defense starts with each of us.
Exactly. It starts with being informed, engaged, and willing to take action no matter how small.
It starts with recognizing that we all have a role to play in safeguarding the integrity of science and ensuring that evidence-based decision-making prevails.
And it starts with believing that a healthier, more informed world is possible.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to bring this deep dive to a close.
It has been a pleasure exploring these important issues with you.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, and remember, knowledge is power. Use it wisely.